The sound of a single gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Superior, Arizona, shattering the silence of dawn and forever changing Dahlia Morrow's life. It was the spring of 1878, and in that instant, she became a widow at 23, young enough for a second chance at life, yet old enough to have already experienced a lifetime of heartache. Dahlia stood at her husband's grave 1 month later, the May sun beating down on her black mourning dress. The cemetery was perched on the edge of town, offering a clear view of the rugged Superstition Mountains in the distance. She felt nothing as the final shovelful of dirt covered Elias Morrow's casket. Not grief, not relief, not even the fear that should come with facing an uncertain future alone. The tears that had flowed freely during the funeral had dried up, leaving behind a hollow emptiness that consumed her. Mrs. Morrow, Sheriff Walton approached cautiously, hat in hand. "Again, my deepest condolences, if there's anything you need." "Thank you, Sheriff," Dahlia replied mechanically. "But I can manage, of course." He nodded respectfully. "Just know that we're still pursuing the man responsible. These mining disputes have gotten out of hand, but justice will be served." Dahlia merely nodded, her face an expressionless mask. She had heard the same promises for weeks now. Her husband, who had worked as an accountant for the Silver King mine, had apparently uncovered financial irregularities and paid the ultimate price for his honesty. The sheriff had his suspicions about who was responsible, but proving it was another matter entirely. As the small gathering dispersed, Dahlia remained, staring at the fresh mound of earth. She wasn't sure how long she stood there before she sensed a presence beside her. "It doesn't get easier," a deep voice said, "but you learn to live with it." Dahlia turned to find herself looking up at Griffin Kincaid, a man she knew only by reputation. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the Arizona sky, Griffin was relatively new to Superior. He'd arrived 6 months prior, purchased the struggling Crossroads Ranch outside of town, and kept mostly to himself. The rumors about him varied: former Texas Ranger, gunslinger with a conscience, or simply a man trying to outrun his past. Whatever the truth, he carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone who had faced death and wasn't afraid to do so again. "Mr. Kincaid," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "I wasn't aware you knew my husband." "I didn't," Griffin admitted, "but I know what it's like to stand where you're standing." His eyes briefly clouded with memory before returning to the present. "My wife and daughter, 5 years ago. Fever took them both within a week of each other." Something about his straightforwardness caught Dahlia off guard. Most people tiptoed around her grief, offering platitudes and awkward condolences. Griffin simply stated his truth, creating an unexpected moment of connection. "Does it?" she finally asked. "Get easier," Griffin's gaze traveled to the distant mountains. "Eventually, you wake up one morning and realize you've gone a whole day without feeling like you're drowning, then 2 days, then a week." He looked back at her. "But first, you have to feel something." Dahlia stiffened. "What makes you think I don't feel anything?" "Because I recognize the look. I wore it myself." He gestured to the small buckboard wagon at the cemetery entrance. "I'm heading back to town. I can offer you a ride if you'd like." Dahlia hesitated. The proper thing would be to decline. A young widow accepting a ride from a single man would certainly set tongues wagging in a town like Superior. But the thought of the long walk back to her empty house in the midday heat suddenly seemed unbearable. "Thank you," she said. "That would be appreciated." The ride into town was silent. Dahlia was grateful that Griffin didn't attempt to fill the quiet with meaningless conversation. As they approached the modest clapboard house on Cedar Street that she had shared with Elias, Griffin pulled the wagon to a stop. "Mrs. Morrow," he said as he helped her down, his calloused hand briefly enclosing hers. "If you need anything repairs around the house, a fence mended, someone to talk to who understands I'm just outside of town." "That's very kind, Mr. Kincaid, but I'll be fine," Dahlia responded automatically, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. Griffin studied her for a moment before nodding. "Of course you will. Good day, Mrs. Morrow." Dahlia watched as he drove away, then turned to face her empty house. The silence that greeted her was deafening. The following days blurred together. Dahlia moved through her routines like a ghost, opening the small millinery shop she owned 3 days a week, accepting casseroles from well-meaning neighbors, and replying to concerned inquiries with practiced assurances that she was managing well. At night, she would sit on her porch, staring at the stars and waiting for the grief to hit her. It never did. The lack of feeling troubled her more than sorrow would have. She and Elias had shared 5 years of marriage. It hadn't been the passionate romance she'd dreamed of as a girl, but it had been comfortable, predictable. Elias had been kind if distant. They'd been trying for children without success, and sometimes Dahlia wondered if their relationship might have deepened had they been blessed with a family. Now she would never know. A week after the funeral, Dahlia was arranging a new shipment of ribbons in her shop when the bell above the door jangled. She looked up to find Vivian Palmer, wife of the town's most prosperous banker, entering with her usual air of self-importance. "Dahlia, dear," Vivian said, removing her gloves. "How are you holding up?" "I'm well, thank you," Dahlia replied, the response automatic by now. "Such a brave face," Vivian remarked, examining a hat on display. "Though I must say, I was somewhat surprised to hear you were seen riding alone with Griffin Kincaid after the funeral." Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp. "People might talk, you understand." Dahlia straightened her spine. "Mr. Kincaid kindly offered me a ride home from the cemetery, Mrs. Palmer. There was nothing improper about it." "Of course not," Vivian said quickly. "It's just that a young widow must be so careful about appearances, especially when the gentleman in question has such a mysterious past." "Is there something specific you wish to purchase today?" Dahlia asked, deliberately changing the subject. Vivian's lips pursed slightly at the rebuff. "Actually, I came to invite you to our dinner party Saturday evening. It would do you good to socialize, and Walter's cousin from Boston will be visiting a very successful businessman, widowed himself just last year." The implication was clear. Already, people were looking to match her with a new husband, as if Elias was a piece of furniture that needed replacing. "Thank you, but I'm not ready for social engagements," Dahlia said firmly. "You can't hide away forever, dear," Vivian admonished gently. "Life must go on. I'll expect you at 7. With that, she selected a pale blue hat trimmed with silk flowers. "I'll take this one. Put it on our account." After Vivian left, Dahlia closed her shop early, suddenly feeling suffocated by the small space and the expectations of a town that seemed to have already decided her future for her. She found herself walking toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scattered homesteads and eventually the wide open range. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rugged landscape, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and dust. Without consciously deciding, Dahlia followed the main road out of town, walking aimlessly until she came upon the Crossroads Ranch. The property wasn't grand by any means, but Griffin had clearly been working to restore it. Fresh paint brightened the ranch house, new fencing enclosed the corral where several horses grazed, and the beginnings of a vegetable garden stretched along one side of the yard. The sound of hammering drew her attention to the barn, where Griffin was repairing part of the roof. He spotted her as she approached, setting down his tools and climbing down the ladder with easy grace. "Mrs. Morrow," he greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. He wiped his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. "Is everything all right?" Dahlia suddenly felt foolish. What was she doing here? "Yes, I was just walking and found myself here. I'm sorry to disturb your work." "No disturbance at all," Griffin assured her. "Would you like some water? It's a fair walk from town." She nodded gratefully, and he led her to the shaded porch where a bucket of well water and a dipper waited. After she drank, Dahlia found herself sinking onto the porch step, unexpectedly weary. "The town is already trying to marry me off again," she said abruptly. Griffin raised an eyebrow as he settled beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "That was quick." "Apparently, a widow of 23 is a problem that needs solving." She shook her head. "Vivian Palmer has already selected a suitable replacement husband, a cousin from Boston. And you're not interested." "I buried my husband a week ago," Dahlia said flatly. Griffin nodded, his eyes on the distant mountains. "People are uncomfortable with grief. They want to fix it, move past it, pretend everything's normal again." "That's just it," Dahlia said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I don't feel grief. I don't feel anything. Elias is gone and I'm numb." She pressed her hand against her heart. "Shouldn't I be devastated, heartbroken? What kind of wife doesn't mourn her husband?" Griffin was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe your heart is protecting itself," he finally said. "Or maybe what you're feeling or not feeling is telling you something about your marriage that you're not ready to acknowledge." Dahlia looked at him sharply. "Our marriage was perfectly satisfactory." A ghost of a smile touched Griffin's lips. "Perfectly satisfactory isn't exactly a ringing endorsement." "Not everyone finds grand passion, Mr. Kincaid," she replied stiffly. "No," he agreed, "but everyone deserves to feel something." His gaze met hers, steady and uncompromising. "Even if it's painful." Dahlia looked away first, uncomfortable with the truth in his words. "I should get back to town before it gets dark." "I'll hitch up the wagon." "No," she said quickly. "Thank you, but I'd prefer to walk. I need the time to think." Griffin studied her for a moment, then nodded. "At least let me walk you to the main road. There's been a mountain lion spotted recently." They walked in companionable silence until they reached the road. As they stopped, Dahlia turned to him. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid." "For what?" "For not offering empty platitudes." She hesitated. "And for understanding." "Griffin," he said, "if we're going to be friends, you might as well use my name." The word friends caught her by surprise. "Are we going to be friends?" Something warm flickered in his eyes. "I think we both could use one, Dahlia." Hearing her name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Good day, Griffin," she said, turning toward town before he could see the color rising in her cheeks. "Dahlia," he called after her. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "That dinner party you mentioned you should go." She frowned. "I thought you understood." "I do," he interrupted. "But hiding away won't help you feel again. Sometimes you have to step back into life, even when you don't want to." Dahlia considered his words all the way back to town. By the time she reached her empty house, she'd made up her mind. Perhaps Griffin was right. Perhaps it was time to stop waiting for feelings to return and instead seek them out. Saturday evening arrived, and Dahlia found herself standing at the Palmers' front door in her best dress navy blue, still respectful of her mourning period, but not the stark black she'd worn since Elias's death. Her hair was arranged simply, with a single pearl pin that had been a gift from her mother. The dinner was as pretentious as she'd expected, with Walter Palmer dominating the conversation with talk of the latest silver strikes and the railroad's planned expansion through the territory. His cousin from Boston, Theodore Blackwell, was seated beside Dahlia, a deliberate arrangement that wasn't lost on her. Theodore was handsome enough in a polished way, and clearly successful given his tailored suit and gold pocket watch. He spoke at length about his import business and his home in Beacon Hill, asking Dahlia only perfunctory questions about her life in Superior. It must be quite an adjustment, coming from civilization to this frontier, he remarked, his tone making it clear what he thought of Arizona territory. Superior has its charms, Dahlia replied diplomatically. The people are genuine, if nothing else. Theodore smiled indulgently. Of course, though I imagine a woman of your refinement must find the social opportunities somewhat lacking. Before Dahlia could respond, a commotion at the front door drew everyone's attention. Sheriff Walton entered the dining room, his expression grave. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, nodding to Walter Palmer. "There's been another incident at the mine." Jim Farley was found beaten near the south entrance. Before he passed out, he claimed it was the same men who shot Elias Morrow. Dahlia's breath caught. The sheriff's eyes found hers. "Mrs. Morrow, I'm sorry to disturb your evening, but I thought you should know. We've got a lead on the men responsible. They were seen heading north, and I'm assembling a posse to pursue them." "I see," Dahlia said, her voice steadier than she felt. For the first time since Elias's death, a spark of something, anger perhaps, or a hunger for justice flickered within her. "Thank you for informing me, Sheriff." After the sheriff departed, the dinner party continued, though the mood had shifted. Theodore attempted to revive their conversation, but Dahlia found herself distracted, her thoughts on the men who had murdered her husband and whether they would finally be brought to justice. As the evening drew to a close, Theodore escorted her to the door. "Perhaps I could call on you tomorrow," he suggested. "I'll be in Superior for another week, and I'd very much like to get to know you better." Dahlia hesitated. Theodore was exactly the kind of man she would have been expected to consider respectable, financially secure, well-mannered. Yet the thought of spending more time with him evoked no interest whatsoever. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell, but I have commitments tomorrow," she said politely. "Another time, then," he pressed, raising her hand to his lips in a gesture that she supposed was meant to be charming. Dahlia extracted her hand gently. "Good night, Mr. Blackwell." The walk home through the quiet streets gave Dahlia time to reflect. The evening had confirmed what she already suspected: she wasn't ready to consider another marriage, regardless of what society expected. More than that, she realized she had no desire to return to the kind of perfectly satisfactory arrangement she'd had with Elias. If she ever married again, big if it would be for deeper reasons. As she approached her house, Dahlia noticed a figure sitting on her porch steps. Her heart quickened until recognition set in. It was Griffin, his hat in his hands, his expression serious in the moonlight. "What are you doing here?" she asked, climbing the steps to stand before him. Griffin rose to his feet. "I heard about the posse. Sheriff came by the ranch asking if I joined them." "Are you going to?" He nodded. "We ride at first light. I thought you should know." Dahlia studied his face, noting the determination in his eyes. "Why do you care about catching these men? You didn't even know Elias." "I know what it's like to need closure," Griffin said simply. "And I know that justice matters, especially out here where it's sometimes in short supply." He paused. "How was the dinner party?" The sudden change of subject threw her. "How did you know I went?" A slight smile touched his lips. "You're wearing your pearl hairpin, and that's a new dress." At her surprised look, he added, "I notice things." Dahlia felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "It was tedious. Mrs. Palmer seated me next to her eligible cousin from Boston, who spent the entire evening explaining why the East is superior to Arizona in every way." Griffin chuckled. "And yet, you're walking home alone." "Mr. Blackwell offered to call on me tomorrow. I declined." Good, Griffin said, then quickly added, I mean if you weren't interested. An awkward silence fell between them, charged with something Dahlia wasn't ready to name. How long will you be gone? She finally asked. Hard to say. The men were headed toward the Mogollon Rim. Could be a few days, could be a week. He hesitated. I have a favor to ask. My ranch hand, Miguel, will look after the livestock, but I've got some seedlings in the garden that need watering every day. Would you mind checking on them while I'm gone? The request surprised her. You're trusting me with your garden, Griffin's expression softened. I'm trusting you with a reason to get out of town and away from well-meaning matchmakers for a few days. The perceptiveness of his gesture touched her. I'll look after your seedlings, she promised. Thank you. He placed his hat back on his head. I should let you rest. It's late. As he turned to leave, Dahlia called after him. Be careful, Griffin. He looked back, his eyes meeting hers in the moonlight. I will, and Dahlia, he paused. Sometimes feeling returns when you least expect it. With that, he was gone, leaving Dahlia standing on her porch, aware of a faint stirring in her chest that might, just possibly, be the beginning of feeling something again. True to her word, Dahlia visited the Crossroads Ranch the following afternoon. The property was quiet save for the occasional neigh of horses in the corral and the clucking of chickens in their coop. Miguel, a weathered man in his 50s, greeted her respectfully and showed her to the garden where rows of tender green shoots were just beginning to emerge from the soil. Senor Kincaid, he works hard on this garden, Miguel told her as she carefully watered each row. Says growing things is good for the soul. How long have you worked for Mr. Kincaid? Dahlia asked, curious about the man who was becoming an unexpected fixture in her life. Since he buy this place, I was working for old owner who let everything fall apart. Miguel gestured proudly to the improvements around the property. Senor Kincaid, he knows ranching, and he is good man, fair. You know where he came from, before Superior, Miguel shrugged. He does not talk much about before, but sometimes when he thinks no one is listening, he sings to his daughter. His daughter, Dahlia's hand stilled on the watering can. But I thought she is dead, yes, with his wife, Miguel confirmed solemnly, but he still sings to her, lullabies. He tapped his chest. He carries them here. The image of the stoic cowboy singing lullabies to ghosts brought an unexpected lump to Dahlia's throat. She finished watering in silence, then wandered to the porch where she sat on the step, looking out at the land that Griffin was working so hard to bring back to life. For 5 days, Dahlia fell into a new routine, opening her shop in the morning, visiting the Crossroads Ranch in the afternoon to tend to the garden, then returning to town by dusk. Each day, she found herself lingering a little longer, sometimes bringing a book to read on the porch or walking the property line to admire the view of the Superstition Mountains in the distance. On the 6th day, as she was pulling weeds from between the rows of young corn, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she shielded her eyes against the sun to see several riders coming up the road, the returning posse, with Griffin at the lead. Dahlia straightened, brushing dirt from her skirt as the men dismounted. Sheriff Walton nodded to her in greeting, his expression grim. Mrs. Morrow, he said, removing his hat. We caught up to them near Pine Creek. They didn't surrender peacefully. Are they dead? Dahlia asked directly. 2 of them are, the sheriff confirmed. The 3rd is wounded but alive. We're bringing him back to stand trial. He's confessed that they were hired by Martin Reynolds. The name hit Dahlia like a physical blow. Reynolds was one of the wealthiest men in the territory, with interests in several mines, including the Silver King where Elias had worked. He ordered my husband killed because of the accounting discrepancies, she said, the pieces falling into place. According to the man we caught, yes. The sheriff replaced his hat. Reynolds has already fled, but we've got telegrams out to every law enforcement office in the territory. He won't get far." He glanced at Griffin, who was unsaddling his horse nearby. "Your friend here was instrumental in tracking them down." Former Texas Ranger skills came in handy. After the sheriff and the rest of the posse departed, Dahlia found Griffin at the water pump, washing the dust from his face and hands. He looked tired, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw and a fresh cut above his left eyebrow. "You're hurt," she said, approaching him with a clean handkerchief. "It's nothing," he dismissed, though he didn't stop her when she dampened the cloth and gently pressed it to the cut. "The sheriff told me what happened," Dahlia said, her fingers careful as she cleaned the wound. "Thank you for going after them." Griffin stood still under her ministrations, his eyes studying her face. Did it help? Knowing who was responsible, Dahlia considered the question. "I thought it might bring some sense of closure," she admitted. "But mostly, I'm just angry that a man like Reynolds thought he could simply remove my husband for doing his job honestly." "Anger is something," Griffin observed. "Better than numbness." Dahlia lowered the handkerchief, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Yes, I suppose it is." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Dahlia felt a different kind of heat rising within her, one that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the man before her. Griffin seemed to sense the shift, taking a deliberate step back. "How's my garden?" The tension broke, and Dahlia smiled. "Thriving, though I think I pulled up a carrot seedling by mistake yesterday." "A grievous crime," he teased, the corner of his mouth lifting. "I may never recover." His smile transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing a dimple in his right cheek that Dahlia found inexplicably charming. She couldn't remember ever seeing Elias smile that way, as if joy was something that came from deep within, rather than a social obligation. "Would you like to stay for supper?" Griffin asked suddenly. "Miguel makes a mean pot of beans, and I shot a jackrabbit on the ride back." The proper response would have been to decline. A respectable widow didn't dine alone with a single man at his home, especially as the sun was beginning to set. But Dahlia found herself nodding. "I'd like that." Supper was simple but delicious: beans flavored with chilies, tender jackrabbit stew, and tortillas that Miguel made by hand. They ate on the porch, watching as the setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Griffin spoke of his plans for the ranch, expanding the herd, growing more of his own food, perhaps adding an orchard of apple and peach trees. "You seem to be putting down roots," Dahlia observed. "Is Superior becoming home?" Griffin considered this as he sipped his coffee. "I wasn't sure it would," he admitted. "After Hannah and Emma died, I couldn't stay in Texas, too many memories. I drifted for a while, taking work where I could find it. When I saw this place for sale, something just felt right." "Hannah was your wife?" Dahlia asked softly. He nodded. "And Emma was our daughter. She was 4 when the fever took her." His voice remained steady, but the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. "Hannah held on for another 3 days, then followed her." "I'm sorry," Dahlia said, reaching out to place her hand over his. "Miguel told me that sometimes you sing to her." Griffin's eyes widened slightly in surprise before a rueful smile touched his lips. "Miguel talks too much." He didn't pull his hand away from hers. "But yes, I do sometimes. Emma loved lullabies. Even when she was sick with fever, they would calm her." The simple confession, offered without embarrassment, touched Dahlia deeply. This was a man who loved deeply, who wasn't afraid to show it, even when the objects of his love were gone. "Elias and I were trying to have children," she found herself saying, "for nearly 3 years. Each month when it didn't happen, there was this distance between us, as if we'd both failed somehow." Griffin turned his hand beneath hers, their palms meeting. "That must have been hard." "It was," she acknowledged. "But sometimes I wonder if we wanted children for the right reasons, if we were trying to fix something that was already broken." She stared out at the darkening landscape. "We were so young when we married. I was barely 18 and Elias was 25. He was stable, respectable. My parents approved." She laughed softly without humor. "I thought that was enough." "And now," Griffin asked, his voice gentle. Dahlia met his gaze. "Now I know it isn't." The admission felt both terrifying and liberating. "When I say I don't feel grief over Elias, it's not because my heart is protecting itself. It's because what I feel most is relief and guilt for feeling relieved." Tears sprang to her eyes unexpectedly. "What kind of person does that make me?" "Human," Griffin said simply. "Dahlia, being honest about your feelings doesn't dishonor your husband's memory. It just means you're finally being honest with yourself." A tear slipped down her cheek, and Griffin reached up to brush it away with his thumb. The simple touch sent a jolt of awareness through her, and Dahlia found herself leaning into his hand. For a breathless moment, the air between them was charged with possibility. Then, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the spell. Griffin rose to his feet, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip as he peered into the gathering darkness. Sheriff Walton's voice called out, "Kincaid, you there?" Griffin relaxed slightly. "Here, Sheriff." The lawman rode into the yard, dismounting quickly. His expression was serious as his gaze took in Dahlia's presence on the porch. If he found it unusual, he didn't comment. "Reynolds has been spotted," he said without preamble. "A stage driver recognized him boarding in Phoenix, headed for California. I'm taking the morning train to intercept him. Thought you might want to join, given your tracking skills." Griffin glanced at Dahlia, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, understanding what was being asked. This was about justice for Elias, regardless of her complicated feelings about their marriage. "I'll be ready," Griffin told the sheriff. "First light, train leaves at 6, the sheriff confirmed, then turned to Dahlia. "Mrs. Morrow, I can escort you back to town if you'd like." "Thank you, Sheriff, but that won't be necessary," she replied, rising from her seat. "I should be going, though. It's getting late." Griffin insisted on hitching up his wagon to drive her back to Superior. The ride was quiet, both of them lost in thought about the conversation that had been interrupted and what might have happened if the sheriff hadn't arrived when he did. As they reached her house, Griffin helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist for a moment longer than necessary. "I'll be gone for a few days," he said. "Would you mind checking on the garden again?" "Of course," Dahlia agreed. "Be careful, Griffin." "Men like Reynolds don't surrender easily." His expression softened. "I will." He hesitated, then added, "Dahlia, when I get back, there's something I'd like to discuss with you." Her heart skipped a beat. "I'll be here." Griffin departed with the sheriff on the early morning train, leaving Dahlia to her usual routine. She opened her shop, served customers, and in the afternoons, visited the Crossroads Ranch to tend to Griffin's garden. The days passed slowly, each one blending into the next as she waited for news. On the 4th day, a telegram arrived from Sheriff Walton. Reynolds had been apprehended in a small town outside of San Bernardino. He would be returned to Arizona territory to face charges for ordering Elias's murder. The sheriff and Griffin were escorting him back and expected to arrive in Superior within the week. Relief flooded through Dahlia at the news. Justice would be served, and perhaps then she could truly begin to move forward with her life, a life that was increasingly filled with thoughts of Griffin Kincaid and the possibilities he represented. The next morning, Dahlia was arranging a new display of hats when the bell above her shop door jangled. She looked up, expecting a customer, only to find Vivian Palmer entering with a purposeful stride. Dahlia, Vivian greeted her, removing her gloves. I hope I'm not interrupting your work. Not at all, Dahlia replied politely, though she braced herself for whatever Vivian's visit might entail. How may I help you today? Vivian examined a hat on display with feigned interest. I've come about a delicate matter. You know, I consider myself something of a guardian of propriety in our little community. Of course, Dahlia said, her spine stiffening. It has come to my attention that you've been spending a considerable amount of time at Griffin Kincaid's ranch, Vivian continued, her tone making it clear she found this highly inappropriate. Alone. Dahlia felt a flare of indignation. I've been tending to his garden while he's away with the sheriff, pursuing the man who ordered my husband's murder. A commendable civic duty, Vivian conceded with a thin smile. However, your daily visits, sometimes lasting into the evening hours, have not gone unnoticed. People are beginning to talk, Dahlia. People always talk, Dahlia responded, keeping her voice even. Especially when they have little else to occupy their minds. Vivian's eyes narrowed at the subtle barb. As a widow in mourning, you must be especially careful of your reputation. Theodore was quite disappointed that you haven't allowed him to call on you again. Mr. Blackwell and I have nothing in common, Dahlia said firmly. He's a successful businessman from a good family, Vivian countered. What more could you want, unless… She paused significantly. Unless your affections are already engaged elsewhere, with someone far less suitable. The implication was clear, and Dahlia felt her cheeks warm with anger and embarrassment. My affections, as you put it, are my own business, Mrs. Palmer. Not when they reflect on the moral standing of our community, Vivian insisted. A young widow carrying on with a man of questionable background mere weeks after her husband's death. That's enough, Dahlia interrupted, her patience snapping. Mr. Kincaid is a friend who has shown me kindness during a difficult time, nothing more, nothing less. And even if there were something more between us, it would still be none of your concern. Vivian drew herself up, affronted. I'm only thinking of your best interests. No, Dahlia said quietly. You're thinking of having something to gossip about over tea. Now, unless you wish to purchase a hat, I'm afraid I have inventory to attend to. After Vivian departed in a huff, Dahlia closed her shop early and walked to the telegraph office. She sent a brief message to Sheriff Walton, asking for an update on their return. The response came later that afternoon. They had been delayed by Reynolds's attempt to escape, but were now back on schedule and expected to arrive in Superior in 2 days. 2 days. Dahlia paced her small house that evening, agitated by Vivian's visit and eager for Griffin's return. She hadn't realized until now just how much she had come to depend on his steady presence, his quiet understanding, and the way he saw her not as Elias Morrow's widow or a problem to be solved, but as Dahlia, a woman with her own thoughts and feelings. The following day dragged endlessly. Dahlia kept her shop open, though few customers came through the door. She suspected Vivian was already spreading gossip throughout town. Let her, Dahlia thought defiantly. She was tired of living her life according to others' expectations. That afternoon, instead of visiting the Crossroads Ranch, Dahlia walked to the cemetery. She hadn't been back since the funeral, but suddenly it seemed important to speak to Elias, even if only in her mind. She stood before his grave, the summer sun warming her shoulders. The headstone was simple: Elias James Morrow, 1850–1878, beloved husband. The inscription felt like it had been chosen for someone else's husband, not the man she had lived with for 5 years but never truly known. I'm sorry, she said softly to the stone. Sorry that we never found what we were looking for in each other. Sorry that your life was cut short because you tried to do what was right. She paused, gathering her courage. But I'm not sorry for what I'm feeling now. I think you would understand. You always said you wanted me to be happy. As she turned to leave, Dahlia felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. Whatever happened next, she knew she was finally being honest with herself. The day of Griffin and the sheriff's expected return dawned bright and clear. Dahlia opened her shop as usual but found herself unable to focus on her work, her eyes constantly straying to the window that offered a view of the main street. At midday, the stagecoach arrived, but Griffin wasn't on it. By late afternoon, there was still no sign of him or the sheriff. Dahlia closed her shop at 5 o'clock and walked to the sheriff's office, hoping his deputy might have news. "Telegram came through about an hour ago," Deputy Hayes told her. "They missed the stage connection in Phoenix. Won't be in till tomorrow now." Disappointed but resigned, Dahlia returned home. The thought of another evening alone in her quiet house was suddenly unbearable. On impulse, she decided to visit the Crossroads Ranch one last time before Griffin returned. She borrowed a horse from the livery stable, assuring the owner she would return before dark. The ranch was peaceful in the late afternoon sun. Miguel greeted her with a smile, informing her that he had already watered the garden but that she was welcome to stay as long as she wished. Dahlia thanked him and walked through the rows of plants, marveling at how much they had grown in the short time she had been tending them. As the sun began to set, Dahlia reluctantly prepared to leave. She was just untying her borrowed horse when she heard the sound of approaching riders. Looking up, her heart leapt at the sight of Griffin riding toward the ranch, followed by Sheriff Walton and another man who she presumed was Reynolds, his hands bound before him. Griffin spotted her and urged his horse forward, leaving the others behind. He dismounted quickly, his face breaking into a smile that made Dahlia's heart race. "You're back," she said, stating the obvious in her surprise. "Just got in," he confirmed. "Sheriff's taking Reynolds to the jail in town. I offered to stable his horse for the night." His eyes searched her face. "Everything all right here?" Before she could answer, Sheriff Walton rode up, leading a second horse with the prisoner. Reynolds was a middle-aged man with a once fine suit now dusty from travel, his expression bitter as he glared at Dahlia. "Mrs. Morrow," the sheriff acknowledged. "Thought you might want to know we got him. Trial's set for next month in Phoenix." "Thank you, Sheriff," Dahlia said, her eyes briefly meeting Reynolds's. She felt a surge of anger but also a strange sense of closure. This man had taken her husband's life, yet in doing so, he had inadvertently set her free from a marriage that had been slowly suffocating her. The realization was both troubling and liberating. After the sheriff departed with his prisoner, Dahlia turned back to Griffin. "I should go too." "It's getting late. Stay," he said simply. "Please. I've been thinking about our conversation the whole way back." The directness of his request took her breath away. "Vivian Palmer came to see me," Dahlia found herself saying. "She's concerned about my reputation, given the time I've been spending here." Griffin's jaw tightened. "I see." "I told her my life is my own business," Dahlia continued, her voice growing stronger. "And it is, Griffin. For the first time, I'm making choices based on what I want, not what others expect of me." A slow smile spread across his face. "And what is it you want, Dahlia?" She took a deep breath. "To feel something, to feel everything." Her eyes met his, unwavering. "When you first saw me at Elias's grave, you recognized something in me, the numbness, the emptiness. You said eventually I would wake up and realize I'd gone a day without feeling like I was drowning." Griffin stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. "And have you?" "Yes," she whispered, "but it's more than that. I'm not just not drowning, I'm beginning to breathe again, to hope again." She swallowed hard. "And it's because of you." Griffin reached out, his calloused fingers gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "Dahlia," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When I first saw you standing by that grave, so still and composed, I recognized myself the way I was after losing Hannah and Emma. But there was something else I saw in you, something I couldn't name until now." "What?" she asked, leaning into his touch. "Possibility," he murmured. "The chance to build something new, something real." Dahlia closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the feelings surging through her: desire, fear, hope, all tangled together in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I don't feel anything," she whispered, echoing the words she had spoken to him that day at the cemetery, though they were no longer true. Griffin's arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest. "Then let me remind you gently," he whispered against her hair before tilting her face up to his. His lips met hers in a kiss that started soft and tentative, but quickly deepened as Dahlia responded, her arms sliding around his neck. This was nothing like the perfunctory kisses she had shared with Elias. This was heat and light and life itself pouring through her veins, awakening every part of her that had been dormant for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dahlia saw her own wonder reflected in Griffin's eyes. "I feel everything," she admitted, her voice shaky with emotion. "Too much, almost." Griffin smiled, pressing his forehead against hers. "That's how it should be. That's how love should be." The word hung in the air between them, not a declaration, not yet, but a promise of what could be. "People will talk," Dahlia said, though she found she cared less and less what anyone in Superior thought. "Let them," Griffin replied. "I've spent 5 years living with ghosts, Dahlia. I'm ready to build a future with someone real. If you are." In answer, Dahlia rose on tiptoes to kiss him again, pouring all the newly awakened feelings of her heart into the gesture. As the setting sun bathed them in golden light, she knew with absolute certainty that this man, this moment, this beginning was what she had been waiting for without even knowing it. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of propriety and passion. In public, Griffin and Dahlia maintained a respectful friendship, though anyone with eyes could see the current that ran between them. In private, during afternoon visits to the ranch or evening walks along the creek that bordered Griffin's property, they allowed themselves to explore the growing feelings between them. Each kiss and touch a further awakening of Dahlia's long-dormant heart. As August gave way to September, Reynolds's trial approached. Dahlia traveled to Phoenix with Griffin at her side, providing testimony about Elias's work at the mine and the discrepancies he had discovered. The evidence was overwhelming, and Reynolds was convicted of ordering the murder. The judge sentenced him to hang, bringing final closure to the tragic chapter of Dahlia's life. On the train ride back to Superior, Griffin took Dahlia's hand in his expression serious. "I've been thinking," he began, "about us, about the future." Dahlia's heart quickened. "So have I." "I know it's still early," Griffin continued, "and I know there are those in town who think we've rushed things, but I also know what I feel for you is real, Dahlia, more real than anything I've felt since I lost my family." "I feel the same way," she admitted softly. "With you, I've discovered parts of myself I never knew existed." Griffin squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking for a decision right now, but I want you to know that when you're ready, whether that's a month from now or a year, I'll be waiting. Because what we have, what we're building together, is worth waiting for." Dahlia studied his face, this man who had taught her what it meant to truly feel, and knew she didn't want to wait. "Not anymore." "Ask me now," she said, her voice steady with certainty. Griffin's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with understanding. "Dahlia Morrow," he said, his voice low and intimate despite the public setting of the train car. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, Griffin Kincaid, I will marry you." They were married on a crisp October morning in 1878, just as the cottonwood trees along the creek turned golden. The ceremony was small, attended only by a handful of people who had supported their relationship: Miguel and his family, Sheriff Walton and his wife, and a few of Dahlia's loyal customers who had defied Vivian Palmer's attempts to ostracize the couple. Dahlia wore a simple dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Griffin stood tall and handsome in a new suit, his eyes never leaving hers as they exchanged vows beneath the shade of an old oak tree on their ranch. "I promise to remind you every day of all there is to feel in this life," Griffin vowed, his voice strong and clear as he slipped a ring onto her finger. "Joy, hope, passion, peace, all of it, for as long as we both shall live. And I promise to embrace every feeling, every moment," Dahlia responded, her heart full to bursting. "To build a life with you that honors both our pasts and celebrates our future." That night, as they lay tangled in each other's arms in the bedroom of the ranch house that was now their shared home, Dahlia marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just a few short months. "What are you thinking about?" Griffin asked, pressing a kiss to her bare shoulder. "About how I went from feeling nothing to feeling everything," she replied, turning to face him in the moonlight that streamed through the window. "About how grief can open the door to joy if you're brave enough to walk through it." Griffin pulled her closer. "We'll honor them in how we live," he said, understanding perfectly what she meant. "Elias, Hannah, Emma, they're part of our story, part of what brought us here. But this us is our story now," Dahlia added, her fingers tracing the contours of his face. "And I can't wait to see how it unfolds." As autumn deepened into winter, Dahlia and Griffin fell into the comfortable rhythm of married life. She continued to run her millinery shop in town 3 days a week, while helping with the ranch on the other days. Griffin expanded his herd of cattle and hired 2 more ranch hands to help Miguel with the increased workload. They weathered their first challenge as a couple when a severe winter storm hit in January, trapping them in the house for nearly a week and killing several head of cattle, despite their best efforts to protect the herd. Working side by side through the crisis, they discovered a deeper level of partnership and trust, their bond strengthening through adversity. By spring, Dahlia had news that brought tears of joy to Griffin's eyes. She was expecting their first child. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months, with Griffin hovering protectively over his wife, despite her assurances that she was perfectly healthy. In late October of 1879, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Dahlia gave birth to a son they named James Griffin Kincaid. As Griffin held his newborn son for the first time, his voice choked with emotion. Dahlia saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt in her own heart: the miracle of new life, of second chances, of love that had grown from the ashes of loss. "He has your eyes," Griffin whispered, carefully placing the baby in Dahlia's arms. "And your stubborn chin," she teased, her finger gently tracing the infant's tiny features. Griffin sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Dahlia's shoulders as they gazed at their son. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he admitted quietly. "After Emma died, I couldn't imagine ever wanting to risk that kind of love again." "I know," Dahlia said, understanding perfectly. "It's terrifying, isn't it? Loving someone this much." "Terrifying," Griffin agreed. "And the most wonderful feeling in the world." As James grew from infant to toddler, the Crossroads Ranch thrived under Griffin and Dahlia's care. They added onto the house, planted the orchard Griffin had envisioned, and became known throughout the region for their hospitality and fairness. Even Vivian Palmer eventually came around, especially after Griffin donated a significant sum to the town's new schoolhouse fund. When James was 3, he gained a sister, Sarah Hannah Kincaid, named for both Griffin's mother and his first daughter. The family of 4 created new traditions while honoring the past, with Griffin singing the same lullabies to his children that he had once sung to Emma, and Dahlia teaching them about the importance of honesty and integrity, values that Elias had lived by. Life wasn't always easy. The Arizona territory could be harsh and unforgiving, with drought, illness, and the occasional rustler testing their resilience. But through it all, Griffin and Dahlia faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Griffin surprised Dahlia with a special gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children on one side and a tiny pressed flower on the other. "From the wildflowers in your hair on our wedding day," he explained as she examined it with wonder. "I've been saving it all this time." "It's perfect," Dahlia whispered, tears of happiness welling in her eyes as she fastened the locket around her neck. 10 years, she marveled. "Sometimes it feels like we've always been together, and other times it seems like just yesterday that you found me standing at Elias's grave, numb to the world." "Best thing I ever did," Griffin said, drawing her into his arms, "reminding you how to feel." Dahlia smiled up at him, her heart full of the love and contentment that had become the foundation of her life. "You didn't just remind me how to feel, Griffin. You taught me how to live." As they stood together on the porch of their home, watching 8-year-old James and 5-year-old Sarah chasing fireflies in the twilight, Dahlia leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, grateful for the journey that had brought her from emptiness to such fullness of feeling. From the widow who felt nothing to the woman who felt everything: joy and sorrow, fear and courage, and most of all, love in all its fierce and tender glory.